Good morning. This is the post for Sunday, June 28th. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic, and I'm not going to talk about St. Maria Goretti, and I'm not going to talk about starting masses. All that is incredibly, it's real, but it's very stressful to even think about. But I did find out, I told you the other day about my encounter with the kids in the lemonade stand. Matt McDonald sent me a clip that somehow that's a project, maybe my kids were part of a project from each school. I'm not sure, but I love the idea that somebody in our community is thinking about lemonade stands and little kids. I think that's great. Even though they're not social distancing and even though they're not masked, I just think that it's very optimistic that somebody thought that having little kids sell lemonade in this world would make a difference. Last week, a friend of mine asked me to teach him about poetry, and I was excited about that because I don't know that much about poetry, but I do know that poetry has become important to me, and it wasn't until I got in my 50s. I never paid any attention to poetry before I was 50, but in my 50s, in my midlife crisis, I began to explore things that I hadn't taken the time to explore before, and so I just want to tell you a tiny bit about poetry. For me, not every poem, I don't understand every poem, although I don't think it's important that you have to understand every poem. I think the sounds, because poetry ideally should be read out loud, and I know that that's not always easy or convenient, but poetry should be read out loud and you hear the sounds of the words and follow the words through the pattern of the poet, and so the sounds in themselves are important. The meaning and trying to figure out what the poet is saying, that's okay and that's important in some poems, but it's not always that essential. Just having those words put together in that way is a creative act by another human being, and our taking the time to take note of those words put together that way by another human being is, I think, a very human act, a humanizing act. And but aside from that, or in addition to that, I should say, poetry can offer us insight into the present, because it draws on the past. And good poetry for me, at least what I consider to be good poetry, I can feel in my stomach first. Just either a memory becomes just palpable, or a emotion it becomes palpable to me just in looking at those words and how those words are put together. So I think that you might try to look at some poetry if you are on the computer or on the internet. Most everybody is. You can Google the Poetry Foundation, and you can find all kinds of poets and poems. You can find poems by mood or need or season. They have taken the trouble to categorize them, and just spend some time with those words written by other human beings in a creative act. Poetry is different than painting and sculpture. Looking at painting or sculpture up live is one thing. Most of the time, though, we have to look at it in pictures or in video. But the words of a poem are on the page. It's paper and ink, and essentially, and those are a poem is the handicraft of an artist of language, and I think you might find some insights into yourself, and certainly insights into the world that we live in if you spend a little bit of time with poetry. And it can put you in touch with your spiritual life, your inner life. A lot of us have been brought up to think our spiritual life is about our behavior and that kind of thing, but our spiritual life is far richer and certainly far more influential on our behavior than external pressure of force and fear and reward and punishment, that kind of stuff that conventional religion loves to get you all wrapped up in. So Google the poetry of Theodore Roethke. He's my favorite. That's where Words for the Wind comes from, one of his great poems. Or Google Rainier Rilke. I think Rilke is a place for anybody to begin looking at poetry. His Duino Elegies. Google Elizabeth Bishop or Mary Oliver. Those are Elizabeth Bishop is a little bit different. She's hung up on baseball, New York baseball back in the 50s. I don't mean hung up, that's just my hang up. She put a lot of stock into baseball, the Yankees, I think, or maybe it was the Dodgers, I don't remember. But she put a lot of stock into baseball as having a metaphorical role in the imagination of people. Mary Oliver is much more into the weather and workings of nature. They're both wonderful people too. Sharon Olds is another one. Sharon Olds was a woman abused sexually and physically, I think by her father, I'm not sure. So a lot of her poetry speaks to the hurts that women have experienced and have had foisted upon them. A. Housman is a wonderful British poet he died in 1936, so he was born in the middle of the last quarter of the 19th century, but his he was a scholar, a brilliant man, but his poetry is very readable, very instructable, very real in dealing with feeling our way through life with all of the things that life can give us. So as this day goes on, I hope you find time to refresh yourself inside and out. I'm going to go sit in front of church for a while for anybody who wants to come and visit. I said I'd do that if last week I left, and I guess people came after I left, but I'll stay 1:32, and then if nobody shows up, then I'll leave. And then next week we start masses. On Saturday morning at 10, our first mass will be a mass of lamentation for those who have died of this disease all over the world, those who grieve them, those who cared for them. Then we'll have the regular 4 o'clock mass Saturday afternoon, and then a 10:30 mass on Sunday morning, July 5th. In all cases, you need to be invited, but my feeling is, knowing what's going on in other parishes, that we're not going to have to worry about a crowd, because the vast majority of people are not going to want to come to Mass the way it is, or the way it has to be so far. So there's seats, but wait until you get some official word, please, before you just show up. And remember, the church is bigger than any one parish. A parish is more than any one person. The physical location is part of it. The esprit de corps, or the spirit that connects us, is more powerful than the factors that isolate us and divide us. And we need to remember that and remind each other of that. So peace be with you.